All right, welcome back to Biblical Theology today. Today we're continuing looking at God and his relationship to water throughout the scriptures. And last week we looked at Genesis chapter 1 quite a bit, and today we're going to go back to Genesis 1 and spend a little bit of time looking at another detail in that chapter. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 6, a little bit later than where we were looking last week, it says, "And God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." This is a really interesting verse that's caused a lot of confusion, mainly because of this word right here, the expanse. A lot of people have been really curious how we should try to understand what the expanse is. What does it do? What does it look like? And so the picture here is that God has come to the earth, and it's been without form and void, and darkness has been over the face of the deep. God's Spirit has then come to this dark, chaotic, unformed world and has calmed it down and given it peace. And then God has spoken and brought light into the world. And here God is coming to this very odd creation again, and he's separating the waters. And there's some waters that are kind of above this expanse, and then we have something that is being called here the expanse, or in Hebrew it is the Rakia. And then there's waters that are down below the expanse as well. And so what is this Rakia? I know some other English translations have called this a firmness. I think some of them call it a firmament. What is this thing? And this has confused a lot of Bible scholars for a very long time. And a lot of people have suggested that maybe the ancient Hebrews had this idea that the earth was flat, and then there was this concrete dome that kind of came up over it, and that's what the expanse or the firmness or the Rakia is. I think there's a better explanation to that. As we keep on reading through the scriptures, something like this expanse, like this Rakia, shows up time and time again. And I think whenever we start looking at those stories, we start to see that there's this different flavor to the creation story, and it helps us understand Genesis 1 and really the rest of the Bible quite a bit better. Whenever we fast forward in the story and we come to Exodus 24, Moses and the elders of Israel have gone up onto Mount Sinai, and it says in Exodus 24:10 that they saw the God of Israel. This is a really strange statement that we don't really have time to unpack today. But as Moses is trying to describe this experience, he says, there was under his feet, as it were, a pavement. That's very strange. There might be some connection here between this pavement. What is pavement like? Well, it's hard, or we might say it's firm. And so maybe this is reaching us back to this Rakia word. There was under his feet, as it were, a pavement of sapphire stone. And then it kind of describes this stone a little bit, and it says, like the very heaven for clearness. So the people come on Mount Sinai, and they see God, and under his feet there is this weird pavement that's kind of like sapphire. It's kind of bluish, but it's also very clear, it says. This is a really hard mental image to get, because sapphire isn't clear. It's a stone. It's a blue stone. But it's saying that as they're looking at this very hard concrete, this very hard kind of pavement stone thing, that it's really, really clear. And what is kind of significant about this is whenever we read a little bit further on and we come to Ezekiel, Ezekiel sees something very similar to this in a vision he has about God, and he's going to help us understand it a little bit more. Ezekiel is in exile in Babylon. You might remember from the Old Testament that Babylon came and they defeated Judah, and they carried this first wave of people into exile. And then the king of Israel later on rebelled against Babylon. Babylon had allowed a lot of the people, including the king, to stay in Jerusalem. The king rebels against Babylon, and that's when Babylon comes in and wipes the nation of Judah kind of out. They destroy Jerusalem and carry the people into exile. Well, Ezekiel was in that first wave. So he's in Babylon already. He's just turned 30 years old. He should be a priest. This should be the day when he's ordained as a priest. But instead, he's away from the temple. He's away from his people. He's away from Jerusalem. And he is in Babylon. And he has this vision on his 30th birthday where God appears to him, and God is sitting on this weird throne thing. And as Ezekiel's trying to describe it, it looks a lot like the Ark of the Covenant, a lot like the Holy of Holies. And he says, over the heads of the living creatures, which are a lot like the cherubim that we see all over the place in the Holy of Holies. These are warrior angels. They were the warrior angels that don't let you back into the Garden of Eden. They kill you if you try to come in God's presence. Cherubim are all over the veil in front of the Holy of Holies, and then they're sitting on either end of the Ark of the Covenant. And so as Ezekiel's having this vision, he sees that there are these living creatures that are probably cherubim, and over their heads there was the likeness of a Rakia. This is our expanse word, our Rakia word again. And it was shining like awe-inspiring crystal spread out above their heads. And so Ezekiel is down here, and the four living creatures have this weird kind of crystally hard thing that's being called a Rakia. And then on top of this, it looks like there's the presence of God. And so as Ezekiel is trying to look up at this, he's having to look through this Rakia thing. And this seems really, really similar to what we just saw in Exodus 24. There's this hard thing that's also kind of transparent. It is like a pavement, but it's also kind of clear. It's this very odd kind of barrier that separates humanity, like Ezekiel, or like the people on top of Mount Sinai, from the presence of God. And of course, underneath this too, there were the four living creatures, the cherubim, which their job is to separate you from God. And so this is, like we said a minute ago, is as Ezekiel's watching this vision unfold, it's a lot like the Holy of Holies, and it's a lot like the Ark of the Covenant. And as we start to realize that, I think that we start to also pick up on the fact that the Rakia is also like something in the temple. It's like the veil. It's like the veil that separates humanity from God. And as God is making the creation in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, all over the place, language is appearing that also appears at the creation of the temple, and any time that the temple is talked about in the Old Testament. The easiest place to see this is on day 6 of creation. God creates humanity in his own image and likeness. Just pause for a second. Think about where else the term image shows up in the Old Testament. Every time the word image shows up in the Old Testament, apart from right there, it's a bad thing. Don't make graven images. Don't try to make things that look like God. Throughout the history of the Old Testament, there are these pagan gods, these false gods, and to worship them, you go to their temple and you look at the image that has been created of them, the idol that's been created of them. That's how the word image is used all throughout the Old Testament. And so in Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2, it's like God's making a temple. It's like he's building this place where God and man can fellowship, and he's putting his image in that place. All these other gods, they don't make their own image and put it in their temple. Someone else makes it. But here God is making one true representation of what he's like. It's humanity. Humanity is meant to represent God, and it's placed right in the middle of that temple. Another place where we see temple language being used in the creation is Genesis 2:3, where it says that God finished all of his work. Well, that language is used in 2 other places in the Bible. It's used in Exodus 40, whenever it says that Moses finished all of his work in the construction of the tabernacle, which is the precursor to the temple. The second place it's used is at the end of John's Gospel. In John 19, when Jesus is on the cross and he proclaims, "It is finished." John's Gospel, more than any of the other Gospels, focuses on the temple. It focuses on the fact that the earthly temple isn't what really matters. What matters is that God became flesh and tabernacled among us. Jesus says, "Tear down this temple and I'll rebuild it in 3 days," speaking of his body. And throughout John also suggests that it's not just him that is the temple, but he's going to make his people into the temple as well. And so Moses, whenever he builds the tabernacle, says it's finished. Jesus, whenever he builds his temple, says it's finished. God at creation says it's finished, because the whole cosmos is supposed to be a temple of God. Everywhere is supposed to be a place where God and man can fellowship and have relationship. And so this Rakia thing, this kind of firm but also clear type thing, is kind of like the veil that's in the temple. Whatever this Rakia is, whatever this expanse is what separates humanity from God. You can kind of see him through it, dimly, not quite all the way. It kind of looks like sapphire, it kind of looks like pavement, but you can kind of see God on the other side. But there's something in between us and God. There's a Rakia between us. And what's holding that Rakia up in Ezekiel? It's 4 warrior angels that are going to make sure that we don't come into his presence, because he's holy and we're not holy. But there's one other place where this Rakia seems to be showing up. We'll remember here that this Rakia was very clear. It's using the word clear to describe it here. Here it's like crystal. Whenever we get to Revelation 15:2, this is a passage we've looked at several times now. John is looking and he said, "I saw what appeared to be a sea of glass that was mingled with fire." So we have this word glass, much like crystal, much like clearness. "And also those who had conquered the beast and its image and the number of its name, standing beside the sea of glass with harps of God in their hands." As John is having this vision, which side of the Rakia, which side of this weird crystal but also solid, kind of watery thing, which side of it are God's people on? They're on the side that God's on. Ezekiel stood underneath the Rakia. Ezekiel stood underneath it trying to look up and see God, but something separated him from God. There were 4 cherubim between him and God. But here in Revelation, as we read Revelation 15 as a whole as well, the people of God have passed beyond the sea. They're standing beside it on the side that God himself is on. They've been able to go through this veil. They've been able to go into the true Holy of Holies and be in the presence of their God. And as we read through Revelation, we see that it's not just the people of God, it's not just the saints of God who have harps in their hands and are worshiping before his throne, but they're joined with all of the living creatures, all of the cherubim. And the reason is that because of what Jesus has done for us, we're able to walk through the veil. We're able to pass through it. And as we pass through, there aren't cherubim trying to stab swords in our abdomens anymore. Instead, they're patting us on the back and welcoming us into the heavenly chorus. Because through Jesus, our sins are forgiven, and through Jesus, we are made holy. We're made holy, and we're invited into the presence of God. As Hebrews says, "For by a single sacrifice, he has perfected for all time those who are being sanctified." We're invited past this Rakia. We're invited past the cherubim. We're invited into the presence of God in the true temple, in his true presence, because of the true sacrifice that was offered by his only Son. And so we should be thankful that Jesus has done this for us, and I think as well that this really odd detail, once again, this very odd detail in Genesis chapter 1, verse 6, if we look at it and we ask questions enough and we read the rest of the Bible enough, that very weird detail has a very important meaning and is going to take us to a very, very good place. And so we hope that you'll continue to study with us. We hope that you'll look forward to more content coming out in the next few weeks. And remember this week that you have full access to God, and He invites you to walk through the Rakia, to pass through the veil, and to bring all of your thoughts and all of your worries before His throne to receive grace and mercy and His help and His love whenever you want it, whenever you need it. Thanks.